Between 1989, when the Berlin Wall fell, and around 2020, when COVID happened, the world had a certain logic, just-in-time production, and the thinking that nothing will change and there is no disruption. But now, the governing assumption is how to manage risk, and accepting that risk is a component of what we have to deal with. But today, the logic has changed. So whatever we are seeing now, nationally and particularly in Johor, has a lot to do with how the world has changed. The world has changed to such a situation where even if you have set up shops in Singapore, the executive wants to see their factories within 2 hours flight. Of course, Johor is the best because you don't even need to fly, you can walk to Johor, literally. So I think that is the context. My major concern is how to translate investment into jobs for Malaysians, better paid job for Malaysians, and domestic linkages to Malaysian industry. That is on the top of our mind because ultimately, as a government, we must ensure that investment translate into Malaysian jobs, jobs translate into better jobs so that Malaysians do not have to cross the causeway to be foreign workers in Singapore, and Malaysian businesses are part of the ecosystem. So when we crafted the new Industrial Master Plan 2020, these are at the center of our concern. How to take the opportunity of this global shift, which we believe, which some of us believe and which the government believes that it will trigger and be the catalyst for a second economic takeoff for Malaysia. When I say the second economic takeoff, I refer to the first economic takeoff. The first economic takeoff happened between 1988 and 1997-98, when within less than 10 years' time, Malaysia grew annually about 9%, wages grew by 9% annually, and Malaysia doubled its size of GDP within a period of less than 8 or 9 years. So we are seeing that potential of a second economic takeoff, but as a government, the fundamental challenge is how to ensure that investment will translate into social goods through jobs, pay, and domestic linkages to domestic firms. I think that both at national level and also at the Johor level, there's a lot of work to do. There's a lot of work to translate the investment into social objective. I want to come back to the point why ensuring the translation of investment into the social objective is important. I see that moving forward, given the global context, the engine of growth for Malaysia will be the following. The first engine of growth will be reindustrialization, which we already see. We have already seen so many committed investment into manufacturing. So we are reversing the last 20 years and we are now seeing reindustrialization. And if you still do not believe that there is reindustrialization, just check with the developers. They are no longer building houses, they're trying to build industrial land. The second engine of growth is what I call tech up. We have been playing in the low end, low skill, low productivity, dependent on foreign workers. But we will need to do this, but when we do this, it will also mean a lot more investment into the economy. What I mean by tech up, we need to automate, we need to digitalize, we need to innovate, we need to use technology across the board. It's not just IR 4.0. Sometimes people say that, IR 4.0 is such a difficult task, so I'm not interested. But automation is a journey. So you can start with 2.0, 2.5, 3.0. But the point is that we need to reduce dependence on unskilled labor, whether foreigners or local workers. The third engine of growth is green transition. We will have to transition into green, partly because we are too dependent on fossil fuel, partly because at some point the government will have to deal with the questions of fuel subsidy, diesel subsidy, petrol subsidy, subsidy for electricity. And that both is a challenge to the government, but also an opportunity for green transition. Green transition at all levels will bring a lot more investment, whether from domestic investors or from foreign investors, but from everyone. Green transition will be a new sector of growth. And the other area of growth, I would call it investing in good life. See, we need better housing, we need better roads, we need better facilities. Those will be area of investment where if we have a stronger middle class, if let's say whatever we see in the first three engine of growth, create better jobs, better pay, better domestic firms that make better investment and better income, we will invest into a lot more in good life. And good life will be a driver for growth as well, particularly for domestic consumption. The fifth area is services. We need to really rethink our services. In terms of trade in goods, we have always have a surplus. But in terms of trade in services, we are in deficit. So trade in services, we are in deficit. We have not exported services, yet we have so many professionals. We actually create interesting services. We will have to rethink our services sector. And that once that rethink happens, you generate growth. The sixth engine of growth, I'll show you, this is the last one, so that I don't bore you too much. I think the sixth engine of growth is really regional growth. If, let's say, we're in a system where we call ourselves a federalism, but we run as if we are a unitary state, where federal government controls a lot of power. The state, the regions have very little say in most of the things. But for this country to grow, one major engine of growth is really to see prosperity and massive growth in Johor. To see prosperity and massive growth in Sarawak, in Sabah. You see, these are least developed, particularly for Sabah, Sarawak, they are less developed, but that will mean leapfrogging is highly possible. Say, for example, Sabah. Sabah has a unique problem. Sabah doesn't use coal at all in its generation of electricity. 89% comes from gas. So it's a good situation because they don't need to even get rid of coal. But Sabah's problem is they do not have enough electricity, even for domestic use. So that is the problem, but it's also an opportunity for investment. The northern region, Penang, Kulim, that is another area. So this sixth engine of growth is where I think if Malaysia can do well in each of those, we will see a massive second economy take off. But for that to happen, we need a new equation. We really need to ensure that investment that comes in, particularly FDI, translate into other objectives that I have mentioned.
Maybe just to expand on this regional economic growth, I mean, there's been so much talk about this Johor, Singapore special economic zone. Of course, he mentioned that he couldn't share that much, but you coming from government, perhaps you can share a bit more.
The point is that, as I mentioned earlier, it is clear that Singapore and Johor has a lot of synergy in this new context, new global context. Singapore and Johor can meet each other's needs very well and complement each other's in many ways very well. Whenever I talk to foreign investors, I say, to imagine where Malaysia is in Southeast Asia, we have to see that Malaysia is almost Singapore with a bit of inefficiency. Well, Malaysia is 1/8 or maybe even 1/10 of Singapore land cost. But at the same time, if you pay people well enough, you pay 2/3 of Singapore pay, you can get everyone who is now working in Singapore to move to JB. But the point is, the SEZ will take time to develop. On the 11th of January, the two prime ministers will sign a memorandum of understanding, and that is a start to have a lot more work to be done. We will need to ensure eventually, through the SEZ, movement of people and goods that is much smoother compared to now. I think that is fundamental. The first objective is to ensure that movement of goods is not going to be, let's say, stopped by any COVID restriction or future. I mean, that is a trust factor that we have to build. The SEZ will provide that trust to ensure free movement of goods. Secondly, to make movement of people very, very convenient. And that is a challenge that we have to deal with. If we can make movement of people a lot more smoother than now, of course with RTS, there are discussions which was mentioned in the statement, potentially maybe some form of special passes for people who work both on both sides, whether there should be discussions on getting some form of recognition so that people can work in both Singapore and Malaysia, and some study has to be done on taxation. These are difficult questions that both sides will have to deal with after the MOU. Do not expect the MOU to spell out everything. The MOU is to establish the framework for both government to work on some of these difficult questions. And then the third part is integration. Integration of, for example, system. Integration of various what they call technical platform, technological platform, payment system. Some of these things will have to happen. The fourth one is really collaboration among the businesses. I personally have raised the questions of whether there's a possibility of, in terms of linking people, we know that there's RTS, we know that there are two causeways, we know that we will have to smooth the process of immigration checkpoint, maybe through some special passes or through whatever, and then we were also talking about potentially ferries, so to link different places. But ultimately, whether this will work or not depended on the trust of the two governments and the collaborations of the business people.
So how does the government plan to capture more value? Because effectively, if we just keep building more data centers, great, but there's an opportunity cost for our energy security and the development of our industrial zones and all that as well. So perhaps you could share a bit more color on that. Thank you.
I generally agree with Dato' Syed on data center. In fact, some of them, when they came to see me, I say, I have no problem with data center coming into the country because they may have future benefit if we can actually scale up, if we can use what they call, we can develop our domestic tech industry. Those are all beneficial. But I say, as long as you don't ask for incentive, you pay whatever you have to pay, you pay a premium, then I'm happy that you're here. So generally, my view on tech hub is this. But interestingly, Dato' Syed mentioned about avoiding real estate play. You also mentioned about real estate play. I just want to touch a bit on this. I am hoping that Malaysian industry, particularly Malaysian developers who are now working on industrial land, take the lesson from managing shopping mall. See, years ago, our shopping malls are all individual. What they call the lots and units were sold individually. After that, they found out that this guy had no money to renovate. He decided not to use it. This empty lot, because this guy is not doing it. Someone come in 5 o'clock in the afternoon, leave at 9 p.m. Morning, no one is manning the shop. And then we introduce REIT, and then we introduce what they call managed mall by developer or by the REIT or by whoever. The point is that the mall has to be managed. The mall has to be managed in order to present a coherent feel and to create good customer experience. I hope this is a transition for Malaysia. I hope we can move from real estate to the real sector. This second economic takeoff presents us an opportunity for our developers, for Jacob, for everyone to see that they are not selling land. They are creating cluster. We create cluster, we create industrial ecosystem, and perhaps some of these companies can invest into Some of our Malaysians, landowner, developer, can be a share owner, can invest into the new emerging economy and ecosystem, so that they transition away from just land, but help the nation to become a technology stick. So we as a nation, we have to transition from land-based economy, resource-based economy, into a tech-based economy. We know now that there are foreign investors. We know that we have land. We know that we have natural resources. How do we take this opportunity for JCorp, for PNB, for Samdabi, for some of these big corporations, to say that whatever industrial land that we are building, we're not selling individual lots. We're investing into the future ecosystem. Now, if we can think so, we will be able to transition. Now, capital will be able to transition into tech capital. And we need that. We need that because if we continue the same real estate play, as Dato' Syed mentioned, history will repeat. History will repeat. But if we can transition, we will be able to invest into the new sector. The new sectors that are coming in: semiconductor, EV, new energy. These are all very interesting sectors that will have at least you can foresee it will be relevant. Semiconductor will be relevant for the next 20-30 years. EV will be relevant in the next 20 years. What they call the new energy will be relevant in the next 20, 30, 40 years. So these are the areas where we should acquire a stake as a nation. And we should acquire capability, and we should build the talent pool so that we become a great manufacturing and great technological nation. My hope is that I kept telling people, this is an opportunity for us to aspire at least to be Korea. To imagine that Malaysia is uniquely positioned around the world for whatever we could do, and this is our chance.
So what he had mentioned actually links very closely to what you're saying. The intrinsic nature, the talent pool, can't really stress the education aspect. That's the first point that I'd like to ask. The second part was a very interesting point that you mentioned too, that the federal government as Malaysia is as of now, is a unitary state. The revenues need to be redistributed in such a way that a state that is actually contributing a lot more is ought to be actually being provided a lot more. And I believe the Malaysian government has done it for Sarawak. So
our constitutional framework that was framed in 1957 and 1963 was based on a relatively fair deal. Why? Back in the 50s, the Malaysian economy was one that was mainly agricultural and based on agriculture and plantation and natural resources. So the states were given natural resources. So land tax and natural resources belongs to the state. Income taxes belongs to the federal government. However, we are now faced with a situation where, because of rapid industrialization over the last 50 years, income taxes forms a much bigger part of the revenue stream that went to the federal government, whereas the state only control land and natural resources. Unfortunately, if you put a climate lens onto the revenue structure, land, if your only source of income is land and natural resources, you will want to exploit as much land as possible and exploit as much natural resources as possible. So the poorer states sell logging rights. I don't mention which state. The cheapest, the poorer states sell logging rights. The richer state may be selling developmental rights and maybe even some reclamation rights. But this development rights has somehow caused the city to sprawl and making our city inefficient in usage of energy and building of infrastructure. So at some point there should be a conversation. I don't know when this conversation will be a conversation that is CODEL managed to relook at how to renegotiate federal and state revenue stream. The state may have to say that, okay, I give up some logging rights. In exchange, you give me some other sources of income. The richer state may say, okay, maybe I don't sprawl the city. I build a more compact city. But in exchange, I have a share in the income tax. So that conversation cannot happen just people shouting at each other, but it has to be a serious but productive and fruitful conversation, so that eventually we have more sort of like income tax sharing between federal and state. If it is an income tax share between the state and federal government, it basically means that it is not a zero-sum game. Why? Because as long as the pie is bigger, federal will get a lot more, the state will also get a lot more. So I think the Crown Prince was speaking in this context. On the question of education, I don't deny and I fully agree that we need to improve our education system. However, I do not think that the strength and weaknesses of education, our education system, is the immediate problem. Okay? Why? I think our immediate problem is a pay problem. Okay? We have talents. They just don't want to work here. And the reason why they don't want to work here is because the pay here is 1/3 of Singapore pay or less. Now, many people do not want to accept, particularly most employers in this country do not want to accept that the Malaysian labour market and the Singapore labour market is one single labour market, separated by 1.5 kilometer of the causeway, which you can walk if you are desperate. So, the immediate problem, maybe not the fundamental problem, but the immediate problem is to address the pay gap, the wage gap. Once you address the wage gap, you can get whatever talent pool that you need. Of course, to move from 1/3 of Singapore pay to 2/3 of Singapore pay may be too drastic, which is why I have suggested to some industrial park operators. I said, why don't you build housing? Okay, we now have accepted that we can build workers' quarters for foreign workers in industrial park. Those days we don't accept this idea. Those days we have this idea of garden city where we work and where we stay should be away, which is actually energy-wise very inefficient. But think about this. Now we have accepted the point that we can build workers' quarters for foreigners in industrial park. Why can't we build better housing for engineers? Why can't we build for Malaysian technicians? Now, if we can at least solve part of the housing problem, which is very expensive in Singapore, then we will be able to tap into some of the Malaysian workers. You pay them half of Singapore pay, they say, okay, it costs me almost nothing to have accommodation. I can be with my family. I may stay here. Now, I want to bring you back to 1970s just for a moment. Because most Malaysians will say, oh, our education is not good, so people don't want to work here and we don't have the talent. We do have talent, just that the talents are in Singapore. But even at the technician level, for those who are slightly older, you remember there was this phrase called Mina Karan. Okay? Malaysia industrialized and we adopted an export-oriented export-oriented industrialization policy or strategy in early 70s and moved very rapidly to the tune that by about early 80s, there were 400,000 mostly Malay women in the E&E sector within 10 years. Within the span of 10 years, many village girls moved to electronic industry, just like that. Did they have a lot of education before that? Not necessary. It's the vocational training that was given to them because of industrial demand, and industrial provided that. So the point is, to move forward, we will need to strengthen industrial, vocational training. We really need to do a lot of things to change vocational training. But when there is demand, when we see now massive investment into the country, and as so barring the data centers, the rest will need engineers. The rest will need technicians. What the government will have to do is at some point, with enough consensus, we have to make hiring of unskilled foreign labor a bit more expensive. Maybe a lot more expensive. But even without doing that, maybe Malaysia is lucky because foreign workers no longer want to come here. Or at least the Indonesians no longer want to come here. Okay, we used to be dependent on Bangladeshi workers. We used to be dependent on Indonesian workers. As pointed out by the Indonesian ambassador to Malaysia, there used to be about 1.2, 1.3 million legal Indonesian workers in the country. Now it's less than 500,000. There's only one reason they don't want to come here, apart from ringgit being not having high value. It's because there's an economic takeoff back home. If you are from Sulawesi, you don't want to work in Kuala Lumpur, you want to work in Jakarta. Because Jakarta's minimum wage is higher than Malaysia's minimum wage. So that helps us to solve part of the problems that industry now have to face the question to move out. But at some point, government has to come in to make hiring of unskilled foreign labor more expensive, and that will speed up the process of take-up.
Actually, Malaysia doesn't really have so much a wage problem, although, yes, when you compare it to Singapore, it is. It's a problem of productivity, meaning that for the ratio of productivity and wages, Malaysia's productivity is on the lower side. So if we increase productivity, wages will naturally follow. So I'm just wondering whether our assumptions are correct.
To say that we don't have a wage problem, we just have a productivity problem, and to think that very often in this country, the understanding of productivity is also skewed. You read the text of various speakers, you read people talking of productivity. They always think that productivity is a problem lies in the workers. As if if the workers work 24 hours a day, productivity will increase. But everywhere around the world, productivity has very little to do with the person, but has a lot to do with investment, has a lot to do with the level of sophistications of technology. The more technology you employ, you deploy, you get higher productivity. Wages, of course, come as follow. So what I'm trying to suggest is that when people complain that we do not have skilled workers, I say we have. Just that many of them work in Singapore. Right? Whatever skill you want, so part of the problem, part of the other problem, just a sharing. There are a lot of views which are very negative about the prospect of Malaysia. So a friend who is working in Singapore asked me, why do you think that this whole environment, everyone is still thinking that Indonesia is more stable than Malaysia when there is a presidential election happening in February? So I think maybe because 1/3 of Singapore financial sectors and financial analysts are formerly Malaysians. But anyway, the point is that wage is important, a question that we still have to deal with, because it comes together, and the pricing of wages will have a lot to do with how we are prepared, how much we are prepared to invest in technology, and also how much investment we can actually drive. Of course, the government has to do more. Let's say as we increase or make it more expensive to hire foreign labor, the government will have to come in with the carrots. The carrot perhaps is reinvestment allowances for automation. That has to come in sync. Otherwise, you just increase the make it more expensive to hire foreign workers, then naturally some of the companies will say, okay, I will relocate to other places. If relocate within the country where there are labours, that can be a good thing. Relocating to other country, if it is thought through as part of the strategy, is not a bad idea. But if it's relocation without us thinking through, that may not be a good situation. Of course, I'm more in the schools of like Dato' Sai, we think that we are in a more complementary relationship with Singapore, and even with Vietnam and Indonesia. So the Prime Minister visited Jakarta in January, and there was an Indonesian businessman asking him, why are you still coming to talk to us about foreign workers? Why don't you just bring Malaysian businesses to invest in Indonesia and tap into our labor? I accept that argument. I don't think that necessary is a bad situation, where the more labor-intensive businesses of us investing in Indonesia may not be a bad thing, because the shift away from China is just too huge for each of the Southeast Asian country to say that I want everything here. It's just too huge. If this trend is to continue for 10, 15 years, we can rise together with Indonesia. We can rise together with Vietnam to create a middle-class society in Malaysia and Vietnam and Indonesia, and that's good for all of us. Tricia, your second question is about federalism. Because in the case of Australia and even now India, they are trying to consolidate the sales tax from the states to sort of like GST or national sales tax, and then they redistribute back the sales tax to the states. So I don't have a firm view on, particularly on sales tax. I think I'm open to all sorts of ideas if that conversation happens.